Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Demetria and I am the Senior Legal Counsel and Complaints Officer at Sharesies. I also like to refer to myself as our Resident Excitement Officer. The name hasn't quite caught on yet, but I'm hoping it will soon. And today I am joined by Jess Brady, who is a financial advisor and a phenomenal woman to talk to about planning your financial future, freedom planning, and much more. So we'll pop some time in at the end of today's session for Q&A, so that way if you have any questions for Jess, make sure you're keeping them up to date in the chat, and we'll make sure that we do leave some time for that. Now, before we do get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians on the land on which we are coming to you from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us on today's call. So for those who aren't aware of Sharesies or are new to Sharesies, a little bit about us. Our purpose is to create financial empowerment for everyone. So the Sharesies platform offers access to the stock exchanges across Australia, the US and New Zealand, and there is no minimum investment. So you can start investing on the Sharesies platform for as little as 1 cent. And if you're one of the over 500,000 users now that are using the platform, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Now, before we do get started, the lawyer in me does love a good disclaimer. So before we start, I just wanted to remind you all that investing does involve risk and you aren't guaranteed to make money, and you might lose the money that you do start with. And any information that we do provide today is general in nature and it's current at the time that we provide it. We're not going to be making any recommendations or suggesting that you buy a particular financial product. So if you are looking for more specific advice to help with your investment choices, we do recommend that you speak to a licensed financial advice provider, and they'll be able to provide you with some personal advice. And if we do mention a particular investment, it's just an example, it's not a recommendation. Please conduct your due diligence before making that purchase. Now, to kick things off, I am so excited to have you here, Jess, and I'd love for you to share with the audience and those that are joining us today just a bit about you and your flagship financial program, The Greenhouse.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, and hello everyone. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I come to you also from Gadigal land and would like to acknowledge that I live, work and play in Gadigal land and feel very lucky to do so. You asked me for a fun fact before we started today's conversation. I'm going to offer two. I have a very naughty and very energetic Lagotto. People don't normally know what a Lagotto is. It's an Italian truffle dog. Mostly unhelpful in downtown Sydney, which is where I live, but I love her dearly. And my second one, which people find quite odd, and I hope this doesn't put you off and mean that we're not friends from the very beginning of our conversation, is that I like to eat toast cold. And I mean must be cold before anything goes on the toast. That's like my very strict rule, which apparently is quite contrarian. So I often offer that as my fun fact. But maybe more of the work info that you want to know about?
I don't know. The pup sounds pretty exciting. One important question, the pup's name.
Her name is Olive.
Oh, I love that. And I imagine you will be waiting for your toast to get cold before you add any olive tapenade to it.
There is no of anything going on toast until it is very, very cold. The crunch. I feel crunch factor is underrated in toast. Anyway, we've started on a strange segue, which I like to do. In terms of sort of why I'm here and why I like talking about all of this is I am a financial advisor and I have been in financial services for a really long time, like 17 years, a long time. And I worked in some of the really big places. So I worked at Macquarie Bank, CBA, Zurich. And what I really noticed was that financial advice in Australia is very much limited or targeted to older Australians. The average person who gets advice is a 55-year-old white male. And so I was like, well, what about everyone else? Where are they going to go to get advice? So I started a financial advice business and I actually sold that last year. Again, because what I noticed was that as financial advisors were leaving the industry and as our compliance requirements continued to go up, the cost to deliver advice kept going up. And I think it's something like 40% higher than it was 3 years ago. And so I was sadly turning away all of these people that desperately wanted to learn about money, but I just couldn't take them on and couldn't charge them what I knew I needed to. So that sort of comes to the greenhouse, which you were talking about. Basically, what I realized is that I was talking about the same 10 topics over and over again. So this year I launched a 10-week online financial literacy program, basically to cover all of the parts that I did in a one-on-one sense, but much lower cost, much more community-based. So that's what Olive and I are up to now.
Oh, I love that. And financial literacy is something that speaks to the heart of many of the employees at Sharesies, and also many people that are on the call today. And it's so exciting to have people that are eager to discuss their finances and are eager to discuss it with you. So as we get in today and we're going to be talking about your financial future, it is really important that we do focus on the present, understand a little bit about what is happening currently with those different economic factors that are at play when it comes to our financial future. Are you able to share some insight on some of the trends and happenings that are happening in our financial environment?
Totally. And just to your piece around financial literacy can sound boring, but if it gives you freedom, it totally is worth investing your effort, energy, and resources into. And it might sound scary and overwhelming, but I think it's like anything. You've got to go in and just realize that I'm starting from wherever I am right now, and that it is a journey, and that I'm going to level up over time, because economically, we're in a really interesting position at the moment. And what I have found is that there have been lots of young people that I've helped in the past who were able to do okay before seeing me without a lot of interest in financial literacy. But the game has changed. The world has changed. And if you've watched any news or read any newspapers, you would probably already know that. And it means that your ability to level up is harder than it has been in the past. And so you do need to perhaps play a more active role. I mean, the fact that you're here tells me that you care about your money, which is a really exciting thing. The world, I believe, is a really difficult place at the moment for young people. It's not probably the inspirational, aspirational tone that you want to hear, but I don't think it's getting enough airtime. So let me give you some high-level stuff, and I'm very happy to take questions as and when you want to put them in the chat or when you want to read them out to me. But let me give you some high-level info. In case you haven't been watching, and bless you if you haven't, because you're living in an ignorant, beautiful, blissful bubble. Inflation is at the highest level we've seen in the last 3 decades. And there's a lot of jargon in my world, but the easiest way that I can describe inflation is how far does your dollar go? So it's the purchasing power that you have. The good example that people love to use is if I bought a basket of goods last year and I bought exactly the same basket of goods this year, what would the cost difference be? And that's a measure of, the inflationary impact. So we're at really high inflation levels right now. For most of us, including me, I've never seen it this high. It did peak at the end of last year and is coming down, but sadly is still way above what our Reserve Bank wants it to be. That is why on Tuesday of this week, they once again lifted interest rates. So we're now at a cash rate of 4.1%. This is the highest we've seen in 11 years. Might feel really good if you've got money in the bank, although think about the idea that inflation is 6.8%. So in real dollar terms, it's actually not keeping up with inflation. And alas, for any of us that have a mortgage, we are noticing our mortgages continuing to go up. So high inflationary period typically is followed by reserve banks or central banks lifting rates to try to cool the economy. And that is exactly what we're seeing. And then we've got the fallout of that, which is, food prices. I think I saw a report from last month. If you've been grocery shopping, you probably know it's more. I think it's about 9.6% more than last year. And housing is really challenging at the moment. So some data came out in May that said that for rental prices, we're seeing enormous year-on-year increases. So what we've seen is about 13% year-on-year rental increases for houses in Australia and about 22% increases in unit price rentals. We have a supply and demand issue. We also have expected migration of about 300,000. So there's going to be about 300,000 extra people who call Australia home this year. We don't have enough stock. Means that it becomes this really Hunger Games like competitive sport to get a rental price that you can afford. So all of that is competing for your money. If you didn't get a wage increase that is in line with inflation, your wage is not going to be able to go as far unless you're able to do some magic tricks. And what this means is that we need a really considered focus on our goals, because as I said, some people were able to achieve goals in years gone by without that much strategy. I'm sad to say that that's not where the world is right now, and so we need to change course. Was that enough? Too much?
No, it's fantastic. And I think, we are seeing things go up. And one of the major talking points that's been on everybody's lips since it was announced in April and last week actually impacted a lot of people was seeing HECS debts increase and the indexation of 7.1%. I remember reading an article, I think it was the average Australian will see their HECS debt increase by $1,700. And if you haven't, jump onto the ATO website. Have a look to see how much yours has gone by. My heart stopped when I looked earlier today and it had gone up by just over $5,500. So things are going up. The other thing that I did want to touch on is house prices. They're also going up, which is a bit contrary to what people thought would happen, particularly with rising interest rates. Can you shed some light onto why we're seeing those house prices increase?
Yeah, so we did see house prices go down this year, and you're right, the latest data has shown we're back up again, and Sydney is leading the charge. I think it's up something like 1.8%. When you talk about all of the different competing factors, and I, in my next life, want to come back as an economist, because the beauty of being an economist is in a moment of time with the information you have, you give what you think is going to happen, whether it turns out or not, completely different story. And yet we, as advice professionals, have to make rational decisions based on what the economists tell us, which is really scary. So when you look at all of the factors, you might think, okay, well, there's a lot of people who are going to be feeling the pinch because of these additional mortgage increases. But when you come back to this supply and demand issue that we have, a property is worth what someone is willing to pay for it. And when you have very low amounts of properties on the market, it does fuel really often bizarre, crazy results when it comes to auctions or sale prices, because there just isn't enough on sale right now. In saying that, if we have a market that is totally the opposite and there is a flood of stock, what you normally see is that price will go down. Will that happen? Well, that is the $1 million question. As I mentioned, we do have net migration numbers that says a lot more people are going to be wanting to live around capital cities so that they can get jobs, and we don't have enough housing supply in terms of new builds. So it's going to be a very interesting journey. Couple house prices with exactly what you say around HECS, food prices, it can be quite a stressful period for people, and acknowledging that and understanding that you're not alone, I think, is quite important. I did some research earlier this year, particularly for women. It showcased that financial stress is not only impacting their money, but it's impacting their mental well-being and their physical well-being at double the rate of our guy friends. So it is permeating to lots of different areas of our life. I believe normalizing conversations about money, like we are today, is one of the most positive steps that we can have, that we have control over, because when you're able to confidently say to your friend, can we not go to this expensive place? I'm on a budget so that I can save for this goal. Or what are you getting paid? How did you ask for a pay rise? The more that we can do that, the more that we can get rid of the stigma, push our goals forward, and create a world where it is safe and inclusive to talk about money. It is my dream and goal.
And I think that is so important in having conversations, just as we're doing, but also having conversations with your friend, feeling that confidence to, as you said, say, hey, do you mind if we not go out to dinner and instead we get takeaway or we make something at home? I think that is so important to normalise that, particularly in a world where we are bombarded with different messages around expectations on how we should be living our life. Which leads into one of the next questions that I had for you, which is around given the current situation and how things are changing, and how should people be approaching planning for their financial future?
So that sounds like a really big topic, which I love. But if you just heard that question and you think, oh my goodness, that's too big to tackle, I don't know if I can engage you this. Stick with us. We've got you. One of the issues that I feel, or what I see a lot for young people, is they find it really hard to plan for the long term. They don't know what they're doing next weekend, let alone what they want to do in 30 years. And often that can mean that they don't give enough thought to what future them needs. It's why often people don't connect with superannuation, which is going to probably be one of the biggest assets you ever have. So if that's you, just know that it's normal. However, I like to get goal setting across 3 different time horizons. I like to look at, what do you want to do in the next 12 months? What about 5 years' time? 5 years is a nice chunk of time to be able to move yourself forward career-wise, life-wise, etc. And then I like to think ideal life. If you could build the perfect ideal life based on what you know right now, what would it look like? And I think the thing when you're considering the ideal life component is that life often has other plans, and it is totally okay to have an ideal life list now and it pivot and it shift and it change. Very normal. It would be more weird if you actually stuck to it to a T, but not giving yourself any space to think about that and not creating any investment strategies or saving strategies or debt reduction strategies that don't consider future you may mean that you become one of the growing number of Australians that is going to outlive their wealth, that's going to live in financial insecurity or, sadly, shall I say, homelessness. And we don't want that. That's on no one's ideal life list. So when you're young, it's important to know that we are constantly dealing with competing priorities. And that's okay. We can't just pick the closest one. Like, I want to go to Bali in 6 months, so I'll just put all of my attention and focus in that. Because guess what happens when you get home from Bali? You want to go on another trip, and then the cycle continues. I've seen it more times than I can count. So I think importantly, if you're in a couple, creating space and time to actually sit down and nut out what you want to do is the most important and very, very worthwhile step. Then there's lots of flow on things that you can do.
Absolutely. And just that revision of goals. How often are you suggesting that people revise their goals? I know for me personally, in the excitement of the new year, wrote, this year I'm going to see myself do this, this, this. And just the other day, opened up my diary, looked at the front and went, oh, that is really not important to me. So how often are you recommending that we review our goals to make sure they're still aligned with our what we're wanting from our future, but also that we're not getting focused just on goal setting, because we also need to take action at some stage?
Totally. So this is my problem with New Year, New You sort of goal inspo, and then by the 9th of January you're back to same you eating the leftover Christmas stuff that hasn't been gobbled up yet. So I feel like James Clear in Atomic Habits, which everyone touts because it's so bloody good, says we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. I possibly am paraphrasing, but I think you get the point. Having goals is vital, but if you don't have a systemized, structured way that you regularly check in and take action on them, they're not goals, they're dreams that you pushed onto a piece of paper into the corner only to be found years later thinking, goodness me, I wish I'd actually taken action on that. So you have to find and create a system that works for you. Everyone is different. Do you want to know what I do?
Yeah, I would love to know what you do.
So I am someone who loves big picture. I'm also wildly optimistic, and I think I can do about 400 times more things than I can actually realistically do. And it's taken me a long time to be able to accept that. And during that journey, it was really frustrating because I had all these grand visions and I couldn't seem to connect the dots. And the missing part for me was the actions, the micro steps, the diligence and the structure. So about 3 years ago, I was like, enough of this. I have done some really fantastic things in my life, but I want to level up. And so I now have a weekly goals list. So I've figured out where I want to go in my life. Obviously, it changes depending on what's going on. Then I figure out over the next 12 months, if I could end the year and knowing that I've made progress on all of these goals, what would my end of year actually have looked like? What would I have been able to achieve? And then I figure out, okay, don't get overwhelmed, because I also can get quite overwhelmed at the thought of that. What am I needing to do this week to move that goal forward? And actually in my goals list, and I've actually just created this for the people in my program because I know it works. And I think you do need this level of rigor. Whether you do it weekly like me or at a different cadence is up to you. Every week I write all of the micro tasks for each goal and put them in my diary. If I don't put them in my diary or I don't have them as micro tasks, for me, it does not work. I forget to call the person to open the thing. I forget, these are tiny, simple things that you think you don't need to write that down. That's logical. Yes, but writing it down means that I know what it is. And then I can also tick off when I've done it. I'm the kind of person that likes to tick off and show progress. And the neuroscience says we need to be able to move ourselves forward and see that we've come a long way. So if you're trying to figure out how to do it, break it into the smallest pieces possible. I also find people get too big and grandiose in what they think they can achieve in a week. Then they get angry at themselves and they go through this cycle. Tiny little micro steps. Build the momentum. Feel good that you ticked off even the tiniest 1-minute job, and know that every time you're doing that, you are progressing yourself towards the goal. Get an accountability buddy. Join a program that has accountability in it. You know, personal training works really well because of accountability. We all probably know how to get fit, but we don't do it if someone isn't watching and pushing and guiding us through that journey. It's exactly the same with your money.
Absolutely. And the other thing is just taking a moment to go, what is the purpose of this goal? Why am I wanting this? Am I wanting it because I've been told I should want it? Am I wanting it because I see my friends, or I see my colleagues, or I see my family also wanting this? Or I did want it at a particular point in time. It was something really important to me, but my life's changed. What I value has changed. It's no longer important to me. And that's okay to step away from that. And I think sometimes that's what we forget, is being able to step back and say, actually, it was really nice that I wanted to go and live overseas for 5 years when I was 25. That didn't happen, and that's okay. I can take the pressure off my shoulders by removing that goal from the list. And a lot of goals do come with financial pressures. So yes, in removing them from your list, you're actually finding yourself a little bit more relieved financially, because you can start funneling that money into things that are really, truly important to you for now. And that might change in a year, it might change in 2 years. But what's important is that you do keep them relevant to who you are today. And that's my biggest takeaway, looking back at some of the previous goal lists that I've written, and was like, why? Why did I think that this was important? So one of those things is when it does come to, creating your financial future, meeting your goals, hearing and achieving the cost of living and paying for all of your expenses that you need to actually survive, how do you find balance? And what advice do you have for people when it does come to finding that balance between actually living a life and pursuing their goals?
Yeah. So there's 2 things that I think are important to call out here. Our parents, and this is clearly a broad generalization, our parents did one thing well. That was, most people's parents bought a property and they paid down their mortgage over 30 years. They didn't consider, what if I want to travel? Or what if I want to have what we call a passive income or an investment income to supplement our income so that we don't have to necessarily work full time? Because we're not necessarily taught very much about money, often we look to what the people around us did. Now, the challenge if you're doing that is A, we know about house prices in Australia, but B, you're probably never going to be able to have the option to retire early if you've never invested outside of superannuation from a young age. And we know that when investing is all about time. Time in the market, it is an asset, it is compounding at its greatest, experience. And so I think remembering that what happened and what we've seen work, it was in a totally different landscape to where we are now, is important when we talk about trying to find this balance. The second thing I want to talk about is a frustration that I have with my profession of financial advisors who are ad nauseum obsessed with retirement. Obsessed. I went and got my first financial advisor at 21, named Steve. Beautiful, beautiful man. Glad that I saw him. Bit frustrated because I wanted to buy my first property. All he cared about was my insurances, which I'm grateful for because I got them and then became uninsurable. And he wanted to talk to me about super. I'm like, Steve, I'm 21. I don't give a about my super. I'm glad that he made me do some things. But the reality is that most of us are more experiential driven than our generations gone by. And we need to be honest about saying there are going to be people who don't make it to retirement. We have no guarantee whether you are going to make it. And the other guarantee that we don't have is that if you do make it, that your money's going to last a long enough time for you to live off. So we have these 2 competing risks of, what if I just focus everything into long term and I never get there? What if I don't focus enough on the long term and I don't put enough energy and effort into making sure that what I'm invested in is correct, or making additional contributions even when I can afford them? And what if I live for too long and run out of money? So we always need to recognize that life is full of competing priorities. You are going to have things that overlap. Telling you that there is one straight and narrow path is doing you and your goals a disservice. So we need to get comfortable with the discomfort that that might cause, and we need to figure out how your money flows in a way that is conscious of your goals, conscious of your values, and trying to make sure that we're not living only for tomorrow, but we're not spending everything and figuring out how we're going to fund tomorrow. We've got to try to find that middle ground. That can be really hard work. That can cause a lot of conflicts in relationships. I know, because I've had to be the middle person in them. And there are lots of strategies and things that you can do to get better over time at it. But don't just focus on one thing. It probably won't give you the results you're looking for.
I do not envy you being the middle person in discussions about money in relationships. That is not an enviable position for me. One of the things that we are going to be talking about is the concept of financial independence and retirement early. But before we do jump into that session and talking about that, I'd love to hear from everyone that is tuning in today. And I'd love to hear if you could pop in the chat what's the biggest lesson that you've learnt about money in your life so far. I have learnt plenty. I don't know about you, Jess, but for me, one of my biggest takeaways is finding that what I know we've used this term already today, but that sweet spot between quality and price, because you can wear a shirt twice and it tear apart, or you can invest a little bit more and actually have it for 10, 12, 15 years. And I know that some of the clothes that I have commented on are well and truly more than a decade old. So for me, that's one of my financial lessons. And also being prepared for the unexpected. There are moments that have happened in my life that have taken my breath away when I go, how am I going to manage that? And recently a sick puppy left me very grateful for pet insurance. So making sure that you are prepared for what life can throw at you. Sometimes it's not all smooth sailing. But what are some of the lessons that you've had, Jess, before we check out our chat?
Oh, so very many. And people love to think that because I'm a financial advisor, I obviously have never made any mistakes, never failed at anything, and I couldn't tell you how wrong that is. And I think it's important as a specialist in this space to say it is really normal to make mistakes. The important thing, though, is that we look back and we assess them and we learn from them. And so I'm sure that we're going to come into this a bit more, but I talk a lot about money memoirs, and your money memoir is like your own little financial fingerprint. They are very unique. You can have children grow up in the same house, effectively see the same thing, and have wildly different beliefs and behaviors with money. And so your memoir is something that you are running around with and is deeply impacting how you're spending with or not spending, investing or not investing every single day. And it's often what you saw or didn't see as a child. And many people like to think that they don't have one, that they've just magically missed that. And then we get them to do some work and they very quickly realize, oh no, it's very present. I just didn't have a label to understand my behavior or my sabotaging or my doubts and beliefs. So my mother was I say very young. She wasn't young back then, but she was 24 when she had me. And within 4 months of having me, she became a widow. And so my dad passed away. I was the only child. You know, having a 25-year-old mum who is a widow means that, you know, you grow up in a pretty interesting environment. I certainly wouldn't say that we had a lot of money growing up. And so money was also always a source of scarcity for me. It was always a source of conflict, and that permeated into my adult life, and especially with risk, especially with investing, because I didn't know what a share market was going to do. I felt that it was too risky to invest in, and I didn't understand opportunity cost, and I didn't take the right level of risk for my goals. And that is a huge regret I have, and it is something I'm so commonly seeing, and I don't want to generalize, but often in young women, where we don't fully understand something. Instead of actually going, I'm going to take the time to learn about it, we step out because it's a control that we can't, it's a measure that we can't control, and we miss great opportunities, and we leave tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. If I could go back and shake Jessica, 20-year-old version, I would be very strong with her that those dividends that you're getting as checks need to be reinvested, that your level of risk tolerance has nothing to do with how scared you are of jumping out of airplanes and the like. It has to be aligned to the goal time frame, and you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and not being in control of everything. That is one of 7,000 examples I can give you of where I've made mistakes, but I think we all just need to normalize that it is a journey and we will make mistakes, and that's okay. Don't bet the house on it. Level up, get more interested and knowledgeable, and then try again.
You mentioned that's fantastic advice and a fantastic money lesson. And you did mention around that scarcity mindset that you had growing up and that it did permeate into your 20s. What was the aha moment that shifted for you? Because it has obviously shifted for you. Was there an aha moment? Was it something that was just learnt over time?
I'm very lucky because I got to be in an industry where we constantly learn and talk about money. And there was an aha moment in terms of behavioral components to how I was thinking, which sadly, financial advisors, we don't have that as a lot of what we learn about, which is hilarious because if you think about us interacting with money as humans, if it was so easy that it was just plugging numbers into a spreadsheet, we would all be much wealthier than probably most of us are right now. It is not. It is so much more than that. It is very behavioral. It's very psych-based. I actually went and did some short courses on acceptance and change therapy because I realized I was not equipped to be able to have those conversations with clients because of my studies. And so, I think the turning point behaviorally for me was I read a book as I was going through a breakup, and it got me to really, those moments in your life when you're down and you're vulnerable and you're like, who am I? And now all my plans have changed. Where am I going? Terrible and beautiful, because you get these little moments to be like, okay, I need to reset because what I thought was happening is no longer happening. And it doesn't feel nice at the time, but it feels nicer later. And I committed to myself to do a whole heap of journaling on what I wanted from my one big life and what I didn't want to hold me back and how I really needed to craft the life that I wanted, and that I wasn't going to be polite and wait anymore, and that I needed to be in the driver's seat and less in the passenger seat. And if I needed to do that, then I needed to be really honest about what level of responsibility I personally have to take in delivering it, knowing that there are things outside of my control. But it was this huge shift for me to say, what's happened has happened. Your decision now is what you do, and what do you want to do with your life? And I cried for about 3 days. My friends thought I was having some sort of conniption, and pretty much from then on in, I started getting really serious about building the life that I wanted. And over the last sort of 10 years, I've been very strategic with what I wanted to do, and I'm very planned, which probably makes sense because I'm a financial advisor. But it's been amazing to watch that I set a goal, and not all of them have come to fruition. I wanted to do some big things last year. I wanted to freeze my eggs, and I didn't do that. That was the one thing I didn't get done last year. But I've been able to start 2 businesses, sell a business, buy a house. I traveled through Europe last year. I've done a lot of big things. They took effort and energy, but they were worth it because it's what I decided I wanted to do with my life. And so I would encourage people to spend, less time on Instagram or planning holidays, and start planning your big life, and then commit to yourself that you are going to be the only person that is responsible for delivering it.
Hearing you speak, there are 2 things that spring to mind for me. Is the first and foremost celebrating the successes, that sometimes we don't tick everything off the list, and that's okay. Making sure that in the moment we go, actually, this is really fantastic that I've been able to travel Europe, as you said, that I went and I launched 2 businesses. I think those moments actually give us momentum to continue moving forward, and we can just reposition. And it's that flexibility we spoke about earlier when it does come to your goals. And then the other thing is that you touched upon is around the history associated with money and mindset and moving forward. And one of the things that I think is really important is to understand, we often use the word your money story, but I prefer the term your money history, because you don't want that to become your narrative and continue to be your narrative. Instead, you want to go, actually, this is what my historical relationship has been with money, has been with wealth creation, how I view it, how I hold on to it, what I want to do with it. And then this is where I want to see myself grow. And that's about shifting from that fixed mindset of the past into that beautiful growth mindset that we all can access in creating our wealth and just achieving the things we want to do in life. Now, the chat does seem a wee bit quiet today, but I can see that Brendan has popped up that one of his lessons is that it is important to get started and not so important about the amount. So I think he's talking about investing with regards to that. But please continue to pop in your comments, and at the end we are going to be touching on some Q&A, so maybe you're saving all your comments up for the Q&A, which we will get to. We actually have one live from Jen, who has said, learning about compound interest, especially to pass on to my daughter, who is about to start working and also trying to save enough to cover our fixed expenses to have as a buffer. That is a great money lesson and something that we all need to learn, the power of compound interest. I'm not sure if you want to comment on that just briefly before we do get started around the power of compound interest.
Yeah, sure. So compounding, as I mentioned, eighth wonder of the world. And in case you don't know what it is, I like to think of it as a tiny little snowball that starts at the top of a mountain. And as it continues to run down the mountain, it gains momentum and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And obviously, in a metaphorical sense, we want it to end up being an avalanche in a good way, not in a way where you get trapped and stuck. But that is what we hope. We hope that your $1 is invested or put somewhere where it earns a return. And then that money that you got as your return also earns a return. And then those monies earn a return, and you can start seeing how it builds up. And this is where time in an investing context is an asset, because the longer that you are invested, the more time that compounding has to work in your favor. Similarly, though, the longer that you say have a debt, the more interest that you're going to pay. So we can think of this through two different lenses, investing and building wealth, and we can think of it as having long-term debt that's eroding our wealth. I think there's a wonderful quote that, interest, those who understand it receive it, and those who don't pay it, something like that. And I think that that's a very important lesson. And to the point that you started the conversation with, I'm almost at the point in my life where I can start saying back in my day, which feels crazy, but when I was beginning in my investment journey, the minimums that we had to adhere to before we could actually front up to an investment manager were diabolically high. Unless you were the child of an extremely wealthy family, you would never have been able to invest in your early 20s. And now the world has changed so much, and we do have platforms like Sharesies and others where the minimums are so much lower. You can invest even if it's a small amount, even if it's competing with all of your fixed costs, and you know that that compounding is working for you, which I think is super exciting for young investors in particular.
Oh, absolutely. Removing those barriers to entry is so important for people to not only start growing their wealth, but actually just start understanding how things in the finance industry work and how you can make money work for you. And speaking about money working for you, let's move on to FIRE and financial freedom. So perhaps for those who are on the call, there has been this term thrown around and we're hearing it more and more called FIRE. Can you start by explaining to the audience a little bit about what FIRE is and maybe giving a bit of your insight and your own opinion on it?
My opinion is mine, and you don't always have to agree with my opinion. In fact, I think we need more conversations where people don't agree and are robust and listen to each other. I quite like that. So let me explain the term or the movement that is FIRE. So it's an acronym that stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. The idea within this community is that you build up enough wealth through whatever means you've decided is the right means for you. They have a calculation methodology that I sort of have a different view on around how much money you need. And when you get to that point, effectively, you can hang up your work boots, live off an expected return, and do what you like with your days. And whilst fundamentally, I believe in many aspects of that, I think when you start looking more and more into the community, and remember, this is a big community, and like every type of community, it's a bit of a spectrum, and you have some people who are diehards, and you have some people who are, just learning about it, and everyone in between. There is a really broad breadth of beliefs and understandings, but the idea is that you can then use your time to do whatever you like. I love this. Lacey Filipich, I think, has a better acronym, which is FITR, F-I-T-R, financially independent, time rich. And looking at time as a precious commodity, it is your most valuable commodity, and really respecting that every single day that goes by is never coming back, I think is a really great way to look at it. Because frankly, a lot of the young people that I help don't necessarily aspire to retirement as a concept. And so what I like to talk about is a freedom concept. So financial freedom is this ability to have control over your time, do what you want with your time. If you want to keep working, you keep working. If you want to take a year off every 5 years and go and travel the world, you do that. If it means that at 50 you want to semi-retire, these are all of the great options that you can consider once you've built that asset base. But without that asset base, you really don't have freedom. You are just drawing down on your savings, and that's going to require you to head back to work at some point. So what we want to do as we're working really hard is we want to put that money away somewhere so it too is working hard, it's compounding. Over time, that gives us those options to do what we want with our life and consider whether there's legacy opportunities if there's going to be, a substantial amount of cash. So I like some of the premise of it. I think how practically people are approaching it is very much an under-saving sort of mentality, and I don't like often some of the ways that people can become quite dangerous in terms of saving ratios and saving aspirations. I also think in the American market, it's a completely different housing situation, and so it doesn't relate to the world that we live in Australia, which, Sydney's average house price is something like over $1 million now. So contextually, you've got to think about, if you find someone that you love that's into fire, awesome. If they're telling you a recipe for success and they don't live in the same sort of location as you, factor in what is relevant and make sure you're considering the contextual constraints that you might have.
And I think one of the things that I've thought about when considering the FIRE movement is that retirement early piece that you have touched on. And one thing that does make me nervous, that if people misjudge or they don't consider changes in market, changes in inflation, the cost of living, if they haven't projected that, especially if they have quite a long non-working timeline or horizon that they've planned for, and then they find themselves having to return for work, there might be difficulties in stepping back into the position that they had. And so how are they going to adjust for that? If you're 20 years out of the workforce and all of a sudden you have to return because something's happened, or you've dwindled down those savings that you thought were going to keep you back in retirement, where are you going to fall back into? Have you kept your skills up? So that is also something that I think we really need to be conscious of promoting and educating individuals when they are going down the FIRE path.
Totally.
I absolutely love what you said about the concept of fighter and time rich, because I know personally I'm quite a big go-getter. I would describe myself, and possibly those who know me would describe myself that way. So I don't really see myself retiring at any stage. I would always have something up my sleeve that I'll probably be doing. So finding something that resonates is important to us. Now, when you talk to financial freedom and how to go about finding that balance of when it comes to budgets, when it comes to your goals, is there a particular method that you suggest to your clients or that you talk about in your programs?
Yes, I'm quite specific about the different steps that you need to take. To cover all of them would take a long time, so I'll just try to give you the headline views. But just in case people are starting to learn more about FIRE, just two quick things to your point, which I really like, is I get really concerned about superannuation money not going in if you're not working, and that often gets missed in the conversation. And I think we have to have an honest, genuine conversation about life expectancy. We have no idea what medical advancements are going to do over the next few decades. Are we going to live for a really long time? Are we going to have enough money to live for a really long time? Because I don't know about you, I don't want to live for a really long time if I have absolutely no money to do anything or enjoy my life. So those two also get missed out of the FIRE conversation broadly. Yes, I believe that there is a methodology that people need to go through to be able to be on the path to freedom. It takes a long time to get there, and you should be under no illusion that you're going to get there immediately. Annoyingly, us millennials, we want everything, and we kind of would have wanted it last week. Thanks. But sadly, that's not the world that we live in. In terms of some key concepts that I'd want you to take away from today. So we talked a little bit about goals and goal setting and the importance of goal setting and microtasking. I get people to do a lot more work about linking that into your value sets. You must have goals that align to your values. Doing some work on that, I think, is hugely important. Once you've defined goals that are value aligned and important to you, the ones you're going to fight for, the ones you're going to say no to other things for, then conscious cash flow planning is something that I'm a big believer of. I hate the word budget. Kind of reminds me of the word diet, which is like restrictive and boring and rice. It's not my favorite thing. Conscious cash flowing is about consciously understanding where you're flowing your money. And where it flows will determine your success or not. And doing that, there are a couple of different methods and ways to do it that I speak a lot about. You must decide which one is the right fit for you, because there is no one size fits all approach. I tend to have a preferred way of doing it, but there is a few. And inside the greenhouse, we actually give people about 4 different types of templates so they can figure out which one's going to work. Test it. Try a methodology. If you're finding it's not working, move to the next one and test that one and create those automations. If I can give you one sort of golden rule when it comes to cash flow, is segregate your accounts and automate the debits. There is, no point doing all of your great goal work if you're just going to spend everything and save what you have left. It's not going to work. So creating goals is fantastic because you know where you want to go. Then you have to be realistic and say, is it actually going to work with my new rental increase or the mortgage now or the kids' school fees have gone up? And so then you have to have really good conversations about trade-offs. You're going to have to make trade-offs. And so that's where a conscious cash flow plan comes in, because it helps you see where are we putting the money, what are we trading off, and are we okay with that? And if we're not okay with that, it's like, well, what else am I prepared to trade off? How else can I reduce expenses? Or how else am I going to bring in income? Then we move on to investing, which I have a whole analogy and methodology for. But I think without doing those pieces first and just investing willy-nilly can be dangerous.
I love that you don't like the word budgeting. I don't like the word budgeting either. And I wrote down the word conscious cash flow because I've never heard that term before. I think we've heard it used and the concept described in different ways, but that is a fantastic way to describe it.
Thank you.
Is there a particular percentage that you recommend going, or how do, probably even more importantly than that, you've taken the time, you've put your money into your different buckets where you want to head. You figured out your cash flow. And then next month, you have that change in your mortgage, or you have the change in the kids' school fees, or somehow the Omo washing liquid that you were buying has shot up $4 along with everything else in your shopping cart. How can you plan without it becoming something that takes over your every single day, and that you know, I'm going to be all right?
Totally. So the conscious cash flow system is something that I've created inside the greenhouse because I did want to create something that meant that you didn't have to have so much manual intervention and you could use that time to go and have fun or do other cool things. So I agree with you. One of the things that we do in there is we add in an inflationary buffer so that when those annual bills come up that you've been hopefully putting away for the last 12 months, you don't get this gap because what you paid last year is what you've allowed for this year and you hadn't put enough money in there. So I think that's a really easy start. We do it sort of in our tools, but it's not hard to be able to build in an inflationary buffer and making sure that when you are automating those payments, you're adding in an inflationary amount. Is it a perfect way to do it? No, because I don't know exactly what inflation is going to be. Is it better than having a massive shock when those bills come? Yes, I promise you it is. And then what I like to talk a lot about within this system is around freedom within boundaries. We talk a lot about, building systems, but we don't talk a lot about how do we make sure that the money that you are spending for things that are important to you have no guilt attached to them, and know when you spend whatever it is that you've allocated, you still have put money towards those other big goals. And so I like to think of freedom within boundaries. As long as you don't go over that amount, you can be rest assured that your other goals are still getting the resources and energy that they need, and you are having fun along the way. You are never going to be as young as you are right now. And so, there might be a time in your life where you really do need to like bunker on down and spend nothing. And I've been there. But that can't be where we stay forever. We've got to find a really good middle ground. And so that's exactly why I built these systems, because I found that people were often spending everything and thinking, oh, well, I'll just get better next month, which didn't happen. Or they were super scared about spending money, and finding that middle ground is exactly where we want people to be.
And one way that we are finding the middle ground, just checking out the questions that we have coming through online, is through home ownership. So a lot of people, it's been on many generations' goal list of I want to own a home. But we are seeing a change in that and a shift in mindset around it. So one of the questions that's come through from Claire is, what are your thoughts on rent vesting? Basically, where you rent in you rent in an area that you want to live, and you might invest elsewhere. Do you have a particular thought on that?
Yeah, I think to the point earlier about looking up and seeing what our parents did, in this context, very rarely does that work. The environment was often that you could have someone who was on a one average Australian income, and there was a stay-at-home person in the house, and you could buy a home in a capital city and have money to do other things. Alas, that is not the world that we live in. I think I read a statistic which is like, maybe it's Sydney, it's like 15 times the average annual income to buy a home. The banks won't lend you near that. So we've clearly got this problem where what we saw is not the reality for many right now. And so rethinking and having strategies like rent vesting can become a fantastic option for those people who don't want to buy in an area that doesn't appeal to them and live in it, but do want the security of a home should they ever need it for a roof over their head or for the growth. Because when you look at property as an asset class, which just means a type of asset, where people have made an extraordinary amount of money from property is not necessarily the return or growth number. That can often be quite similar to the share market. The share market in some years can considerably outperform that. It's leverage. It's the fact that you've taken on debt. So because it's of a much higher number, because you've borrowed a lot of money, then the growth is a lot higher in terms of actual dollar numbers. You need to consider the interest that gets paid over that period though. If you're considering rent vesting, you need to make sure that you understand all of the tax implications before you buy, very important, and that you can withstand interest rate shock. So again, if interest rates continue to go up, you don't want to have to fire sell an asset because you didn't factor that in. So personally, I rent vest. It's where I'm at right now in my life. Will it be forever? Probably not. But I think more and more people are starting to look at creative ways that they can be in an asset class that they want to be in, but it doesn't mean that they're in the middle of nowhere with no fun in their lives. So I think being open to that and doing your research, it's a huge, huge asset, and you need to make sure that enormous amounts of due diligence is done. Don't just buy in a suburb because you grew up there or because your mate bought in the same apartment block as you and it would be fun for you both to be on the strata committee. Like I'm saying this in jest, but I'm saying it because I've seen it. If you're going to actually do that, I would say hire a team of professionals to help you. You don't want to get that wrong.
Oh, definitely. And I also love the fact that it can help you feel like a goal isn't out of reach because you've bought something within your boundaries. And I think understanding what your parameters are, and that goes for any type of investing, is can you actually withstand the shocks? Can you withstand the ups and downs of any market? I think that is so important to sit there before you do any type of investing, whether it is in stocks, whether it is in real estate, and rent vesting is just one of those ways that you can comfortably operate within your parameters. Another question that we do have coming through is from there, and they've said, I am currently working on my PhD, so my salary is low. That's very exciting. I think congrats. I have a lot of questions about the PhD, but the question is, what would be your suggestion to continue to build my finances? I know that once I'm finished, my salary will be much higher, but I don't want to stop my financial journey at this time, which gives me a big smile as I hand it over to you, Jess.
Sure. I think whenever you're talking about someone that is retraining, reskilling, adding additional credentials to their title, we look at them potentially going backwards for a period to go forward. And I think that, sometimes you can feel frustrated or upset that maybe you're not keeping pace with your friends anymore. But if you're doing a PhD, I would probably assume that you've factored in that once you're done with that, the career opportunities, the income opportunities, they're going to quickly outstrip the pain and trauma perhaps that was a period of time where you didn't have the same level of income that you may have had before. So investing in ourselves and our careers is vital, and I don't think we should feel guilty during that period. One thing you did talk about though, which I think is really important, is using the time to level up your knowledge. Get on top of your skills. There is no reason, even if you don't have the ability to invest a lot of money right now, any money right now, we know that at some point you're going to. And so using this beautiful period to level up your skills, to keep learning, to take courses, to read books, to listen to podcasts, to do whatever it is, to actually make sure that when you are ready, when you have that income that's coming in at the level that gives you some wiggle room to do some fun stuff with, you're not then starting from scratch to level up. Use this beautiful time to get your head around all of the things, and you will put yourself in good stead. Very, very exciting for you.
And that is because time is knowledge. And knowledge is power. So use that time. 100% with you on that. And good luck on the PhD. It's very exciting.
Congrats. Very exciting.
We do have time for one last question, and this one comes from Christine. She says, I eventually want to look into getting in touch with a financial advisor to discuss my goals. How can someone like me go about this? And are there any government websites to assist with finding a provider in this?
Yeah, great question. So, government websites, maybe I'll give you a different resource just in case that's not where you want to go because it becomes quite complicated. Awesome that you want a financial advisor. I think that that's really exciting to level up your skills. In terms of managing expectations, because I found that when I was giving one-on-one advice, I had a 3-month wait list and people would sit with me and then I would talk about the prices. And it would just be quite upsetting for both them and I to realize where they were at and where sort of we would need to be able to make it commercially viable. So take a deep breath in case you are, and I'm not saying you shouldn't go and get advice. Absolutely. I am a licensed qualified advisor. I believe that if you can afford great advice, it can do wonders. I've seen it do wonders to people's financial worlds. But on average, advice fees are about $8,300 for 1 year's worth of engagement at the moment. Not to deter you, just to make sure that you're going in with open eyes in terms of what you should expect it to cost to work with an advisor. There is an enormous amount of rigor and compliance that happens behind. It's sort of the swan on the lake. Like most clients don't even see the sheer weight of work that advisors have to do. And that is sadly reflected in the cost. If you're not quite there yet, then I would get you to look at alternative avenues. Again, books, podcasts, programs like what I've built. And they're really designed for those people that want to learn about money, but aren't quite at the point where they can afford or justify that fee, so that you've got different options. If you're like, financial advisor is where I'm at, go to advisorratings.com.au. I've never engaged in it because I had a problem where I had too many referrals from existing clients, but some people have lots of information about their profile, they get lots of clients to put testimonials in there, and so you can then track it by postcode or whatever it is that you're looking for. If you're really stuck, email me and I can hook you up with a few advisors. I just need to know a little bit more about what you're looking for. Jessica@jessicabrady.com.au, or you can DM me on Instagram, JessBrady_financial advice. I know lots of great advisors and happy to forward on your details to them.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your Instagram handle, because I think that there might be a few people that will be following you after this. And with that comes to the close of today's session. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Jess, for joining us. I think that there has been some fantastic takeaways around value alignment, around the conscious cash flow, your mindset, your approach when it comes to actually understanding what financial freedom is for you. And I think they are all such valuable lessons that we can take away today. And if you do want to learn more, as Jess said, she's just let you know her website and also her Instagram handle. And you can also follow Sharesies on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube and Facebook, or check out our website in the Learn article. But thank you so much, Jess. I'll let you go so that way you can have lunch with your cold toast and with Olive. And have a wonderful day. And everybody online, have a wonderful day. And thank you so much for joining us today.